last focus.
Last focus.
We promised you something different, right? We said
did.
the app focus was not quite going to be an app focus this time. And we're going to see exactly what I'm talking about when I say that I'm pretty sure this whole Gentoo thing is going to last us to the end of the season. It absolutely will. We'll get to that point. This is Gentoo focus.
Gentoo focus.
Let's focus on Gentoo. Dan, you're checking in.
Yep.
You have already rocketed past me as far as what you've been able to do with the system. I mean, you've got a full-on GUI. You've got things happening. Like, you can use this as an everyday kind of system.
I got a portable machine that I can take places and do stuff with. Yeah, absolutely, in GUI fashion. So that's pretty cool.
That is not me, folks. Not yet.
Well, you'll get there. Like, I think you're getting closer every time. So that's cool. Once I get started on a project, I have a hard time letting go until I'm to a satisfied point.
Oh yeah,
but
yeah, I get that.
I'm never really satisfied. So I mean, I'm always tinkering on stuff. But anyway, updates are going well on old Tatertop. I think I mentioned that I'm testing with Gentoo testing.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
It's like cutting edge stuff here. So
you're gonna. This is my favorite thing about this is that there are gonna be two sides to this Gentoo focus, this Gentoo Check-in. There's going to be the bleeding edge. I'm testing all the weird stuff and just having fun with it, kind of thing. And the other end of that is gonna be. I'm still knee deep in the handbook, kind of figuring things out. And what does this mean, and why did it break?
Honestly, the way I'm doing it with the Gentoo testing thing, it feels a lot like Arch, at least as far as the way updates come down. You know, in a way I can choose when that happens and all of that stuff, so I can work around any potential issues that I'm paying attention to in the packages that I'm using, if I pay attention. And so, yeah, now that things are set up and working, it's just updating, and I can do that when I know I want to get something that's come down. Here's a couple of things that I mentioned, I think, on the live stream, and maybe even in the last episode, but potentially some things I didn't too. So this is what I found useful. Last time I mentioned to use the handbook when setting things up, especially the compile flags and whatnot. It's pretty important, so I thought I definitely wanted to mention that one again. The handbook is very helpful.
I'll double down on that too, but I will say I've got some issues.
Yeah, it's not perfect, and it's not everything, and sometimes you need to go beyond what just the handbook is telling you, but it is a handbook, and it is a guide to get you sort of on the right track, and it does that.
Definitely is.
It does that. So do use that. Here's a big one that I've found personally. The package naming is very different. Packages use a category and then a package name type of convention. So to help ease things for you when you're looking for stuff, you can do the search in the command line, but I think using packages.gentoo.org is a good way to go to search for your thing. It's very, very clean looking, simple enough and fast enough that I just have a web browser there so you can search out the things that you want to install.
And being able to control F if there's a bunch of stuff that shows up that is similarly named or something like that really, really helps out.
Right.
I'll definitely agree on this one too.
Yeah, you can totally use emerge -s and then the expression in a regular type expression if you want to search for stuff on the command line. Or just, emerge -s and what you think the package is named or something in the package. You can put that stuff in there and it'll spit out a whole bunch of stuff in your face. But it isn't always as nice and clean looking. So I think the webpage is good, especially for new people. Here's one that isn't huge, but something to watch out for is pay attention to the eSelect news. After you've done updates or installing packages. Before
you do them.
But before or sometimes after. So, because sometimes actions or you have to follow up with other things after you've done some of these. So the eSelect news can help tell you, like you need to run, like some hooks aren't automatic like they are in other package managers. So if it's not, it'll tell you what things you need to do to enable them. Especially like services and stuff. If you need to enable some services, it'll give you the RC, commands to go update that and make sure your service is now running, because you installed it and you think, oh, why, what the, it's not doing anything. And it's because the service isn't enabled because it told you to do that in the eSelect news.
Yep. The user merge thing is actually part of the news that I noticed. So if you're on Gentoo and you haven't done the whole user bin merge thing, that's one of those news articles that you really need to pay attention to. And if you don't, eventually you're going to get caught up.
It'll shock you.
It's not going to be good.
Something's going to surprise you.
But this is a very old style way of dealing with, I think, administration. And I think it is kind of refreshing to kind of go back to that kind of thing where, you don't have to necessarily have a web page to tell you about things and forget to go. Like, this is part of the command line. It's part of just the general administration style.
That's a good way to put it.
Gentoo. And I like it. I like having it there right where I'm doing the work. I can also check what I need to be doing later on.
Right. I agree. No,
that's cool.
It is pretty cool and important to follow up, if you have any follow-up action items. So,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I mentioned that there's a lot of reading in Gentoo, but there is. So make sure to do it. Yeah. Full confession. This will shock everyone. I'm a tinkerer.
No.
Yeah, okay. So that doesn't shock anybody. But since I like to experiment, I thought the next experiment that I'm going to partake in here on little old Tatertop is maybe treat it a little better and put something a little lighter on it. And it's all done. It took less time than I thought it was going to. It's kind of great. I thought it would still be going when we started recording, but it was pretty much all done just about the time we did start recording. So that's pretty cool. So I added LXQt because I'm gonna put it alongside my Plasma install. Those things can kind of co-mingle pretty nicely. Typically,
well, the Qt base underneath is similar, and then Plasma and LXQt kind of grow off of that.
Yeah, I needed to do some finagling as far as some settings, but for the most part, they'll co-mingle just fine. So I'm good with
until the Qt6 change.
Yeah, and that's coming too. But
no, boy,
yeah. Well, everything will have to get compiled together anyway, so it should work.
I feel like that's going to happen before the season's out. So we might finally hear. Yeah, I blew it all up.
Yeah, we might. Anyway, it wasn't a big install. There was only like 40 packages extra to install from what I saw before it started. So it wasn't huge. And it is all done. I can see as the screen is just idle over there now. But I think it'll be a fun experiment and perhaps a better choice for this woefully powered machine that I have. So full report next time we check in.
Until then, we're going on a journey. I've never done Gentoo before. I know Dan hadn't either, but I don't know how. Dan took it and just ran and was good to go. Running desktops and everything. I was not that fast. When I started this journey, really kind of wanted to write everything down and kind of remember where I had been so that I didn't make similar mistakes. And I definitely, absolutely made a mistake. So my first effort is my first two efforts have been on Proxmox, just running a VM. I've SSH'd into my Gentoo environment and just kind of done all of the work from there. I think there are some things that the handbook doesn't cover that would be specific to Proxmox that I'm gonna just have to figure out. Maybe
that makes sense.
We'll have to see. Yeah, we'll find out. Thankfully, though, Proxmox has snapshotting abilities so that you can kind of not hurt as bad when things go wrong. You can kind of roll back a little bit.
That's cloning ability too, so that's also pretty nice.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So I can kind of just make branches and decide how I want to deal with that kind of stuff. But so the first thing I did after you get in kind of to you download the Gentoo disk, you give it to Proxmox, and you boot up a system. I kept pretty much everything default. I figured that would be the easiest way to do it. We will see. But after you kind of get through the first couple of steps, which are pretty simple, I think anybody can get there, I enabled SSH so that I could do it from any desktop. I didn't have to be tied to a specific machine, or I didn't have to be in a specific spot in my house. I could be on any platform, whatever. As long as I had SSH, I could handle it. That's pretty easy. It's in the handbook. It reminds you to run it if that's how you want to deal with stuff. So that's really kind of cool. The handbook has been pretty good to me. You go through verification and partitioning of your disks, just like you do in Arch, and over the next few steps, pretty much just going to be the same kind of experience that you would have in a like a true Arch install, not using the installer kind of situation.
Right.
You create your install environment. You don't have to, I think, mount MNT Gentoo. That directory already exists.
So yeah, if you're using the install disk that Gentoo provides, so
I definitely am.
You can technically use any live install disk,
which is crazy to me.
Yeah, little wild, right? Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm keeping it as standard as possible.
That's cool
because I've already blown it up and by deviating. So
right.
First run through is going to be pretty standard. You verify networking, make sure you have an IP address and all that stuff. You verify the date. It's in UTC, so you kind of have to figure that out. Make sure that it's right. It is. If you have an IP address, it'll be fine. And then you download and extract stage 3. So stage 3 is where like the bulk of the system is, and that's what you're gonna like plop into your new environment, your install environment that you will cheroot into later. Right. Then you set some compiler info. Now this is pretty involved.
Yes.
This is the first time where you have to deviate from just rote instructions of do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. You have to make some kinds of decisions here. And it's not particularly difficult, but you do have to read a lot, and there's a base level of understanding that I think is kind of expected to happen. So I set some compiler information. I just did march native, which meant that it would just kind of figure it out itself. It would auto-select based off of whatever the hardware it's on. I'm trusting it to do that, and that seemed to work okay. By default, O2 is one of the compiler options that you're going to be using. I know we had covered on the show last season O3 and how that would have some impact on speed.
Yeah, I think Clear Linux had switched everything.
They've been using
by default. Yeah.
O3. So Gentoo still has some caveats about it, so I didn't want to break anything worse. So I stuck with O2, and then pipe is another option that I just left alone. And it did mention in the handbook that GCC might die if the system is low memory. I don't know what low memory actually is. The handbook doesn't define what low memory is. So my question to the handbook is 4 gigabytes low? Because that's what I gave to my VM. And
that's what I have in Tatertop, so there you go.
Right. And it turns out, using context clues later on in the handbook, yes, is the answer. Because it has some kind of guidance on how many jobs you should be able to run. And on 4 gigs, one job, turns out. Just one.
Yes.
Because 2 gigs per job is kind of the knowledge there. So I'm like, all right, fine.
Normally you'd pin a job to a CPU that you have available as well. But they did mention the low memory limitation as far as having the number of jobs that you want to assign these things to. You got to leave a little space for the system to run.
Right.
In addition to the jobs that it's doing, right?
So I made sure a little later on, there's a make opts option, and I made sure to set it to J1 for jobs, one job, just one job.
I did this as well, just so you know.
I don't think it took, actually, because as text was flying by, it was like 2 jobs, and I'm like, uh-oh, but I have swap, so okay, that's cool.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yep.
So you continue going through the process. You choose your mirrors. I chose, I think, Georgia. There were some other places, but Georgia was. I was like, that's close enough. That's close enough. It's fine. So the Gentoo.conf file has examples of repos and all of that kind of stuff in user share. So we went through that entire process. I copied DNS configuration to the install environment so that after the reboot, I would still have internet.
Yeah, well, at least name service.
Right, yeah. Oh, true. Yeah, actually, the last step, which is many steps from now, I made sure I had the rest of the IP addressing and everything else going on. But as you can see, as you can see, and as you will see, it is very involved. I think there's more steps in a Gentoo install than an Arch install. So like we've gone beyond since about step 7 here. We've gone way beyond what an Arch system would require you.
Arch has some scripts that do some of this stuff for you automatically, right?
Right. So to anybody that has ever said Gentoo is easy, you're wrong. There's been a lot of attention to detail, which for a lot of people is not easy. And
that's true.
There has been a lot of configuration and contexting that is just very difficult for a lot of folks. So I mean, I am a very technical person. I can get through pretty much just about anything. I know I will get through Gentoo. Yeah. And then, so after you mount all that stuff manually, you root into the environment, then you source profile, and then you add yourself a bash prompt. So that kind of stuff is optional. You don't have to add the bash prompt, but it reminds you that you're in a root environment. And then when you something like if you type in exit, you're out of the root environment, and now you're back into the live system.
Right.
So it helps. But the thing is that, like, if your SSH session, in my case, if it ever fails or stops, you have to do it all again. So you have to get back into the root. You have to source the file again.
Yep, all that.
Right. So it is a bit of a slog if you can't get it done in one go. And I don't know if you know anything about me, but I tend to just hit stuff as I can. If I got 30 minutes, cool, I'll run a couple commands, make sure I got things going or whatever, and I'll walk away. And if that fails, well, now you got to do it all over. Well, some of it, you got to get back into the mode again.
Yeah, you got to know where it went wrong and get back there. Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, if I hadn't had the Linux experience that I've had, if I didn't know the things that I knew, then that would be a, you know what, rip the Band-Aid off, start over again then kind of situation for me. Because it's not exactly obvious where you should start over again. So it is difficult. All right. So after you root in, you mount your boot partition so that whenever you deal with kernel-y stuff and you actually do grubby things, that all works the way you expect it to. So you mount that. Then the handbook mentions that you should emerge web rsync. And this builds a local repository so you know what kinds of software you have available to you. And this is when it brings in the news. This is why I was talking about the news. We didn't actually do anything. It's basically like an apt update, essentially, and kind of gives you what you're working with, the things that you can pull in, how you can deal with the system, and how you can build it from here. And one of the news items was the user merge thing. And there are options as we get into the next step of profiles that you can choose different profiles, right? Just like base system with system D. You can do a GNOME system, a Plasma system, and you can kind of think of these as like the group installs in a Red Hat or a Fedora or a CentOS kind of system. And so it really kind of, it sets a lot of things for you. So, I mean, Gentoo is not 100% build everything yourself, there are things like these profiles that will help you make a lot of decisions for you so that you don't have to spend an extra hour trying to figure out, okay, well, if I bring in this gnome package, what am I going to have to do, right? There's a lot of resolution to that stuff for you in these profiles, but, it doesn't mean that you can be thoughtless on this. But anyway, out of those 10 news articles, the user merge is probably the only thing that would have affected me because I was planning. I originally booted this thing up on a systemd, the systemd boot installation, because I was planning on having systemd, and then I realized a little later on, well, that's not the way Gentoo does things. Gentoo is an OpenRC system. Well, by default, you can do systemd, but by default,
it's there. You can do it, but it's not. You're right. It's not the default.
Right. The way that the handbook is written, it favors OpenRC, and I suppose the community favors OpenRC as well. So,
Leo, I don't mean to brag too much, but I did it both ways.
Good. Well, I plan on it. I do plan on it because I want to have the experience of both ways. I need to know how it goes. And it's not like the handbook doesn't have a systemd section. It does, and it will explain it, but you have to be very thoughtful in the steps that you take after this point, because it's like, do this, do this, do this, if you're on OpenRC. If you're on systemd, do this, do this, do this. So you do have to be very careful about.
You got to know where to branch off and do the right thing. So I did the one in the VM, and then I did I'm OpenRC on the laptop, just so you know.
Okay, cool. So after you do the WebRSync, you have kind of a base system to look at to kind of figure out where you're going to do that. But in the next step, you select the profile. So this is where you decide what your system is going to be. After poking around, right? It says in the handbook, after viewing the available profiles for the AMD 64 architecture, which I am on, users can select a different profile for the system. Well, what I didn't know at the time was that the handbook was not talking about right now.
Right.
It was saying that you can sometime in the future, because we haven't covered this step yet, look at the profiles and decide to build a Gentoo based on these profiles.
Right.
So I took that to mean that I could do that right now. And so I was like, you know what? My plan is to get a base system with GNOME, Gentoo, systemd. And so that's what I chose. There is a profile specifically for that.
Yep.
And so I did it 100%. And I was like, this is going to be great. Not a problem at all. So the profile itself, if you want to check for yourself, I think it was like number 17 or something for me. It was desktop GNOME systemd merged user, so that I wouldn't have to worry about merging my own user directory. It would have systemd, which is what I planned on originally. I wanted GNOME just so I could have a base system that is huge, and it would take a long time to compile, so I could have cool compiling stuff in the background like Dan does. That's cool. And I was like, that's going to be great. Well, don't do this. Don't. Because you need kernel sources in user source Linux that don't exist yet. And they don't tell you that this doesn't exist yet, even though they tell you that you can select any of the profiles. And that was my mistake. I learned this later on, but after poking around for about an hour to find out what step I missed, because I went back, dude, to the very first step. And I was like, why is it missing? Because I tried doing the @world update, right? Yep. It tells you after you pick your profile to do an @world update. It basically, pulls in everything, compiles everything, gets everything ready for you, and then you can move on. That failed very early on. Like there were like 180 things I needed to compile. And I'm like, well, this is going to take forever. I'm going to go to bed. But before I could even leave, it was like error. And I started looking into it, and it was like, oh yeah, you don't have kernel sources in your user source Linux. And I'm like, well, why not? Why wouldn't that be there? Because it said I could change profiles, so I picked one, and I don't know.
Yeah, because you haven't gotten that far yet to be able to. Yeah,
exactly. So I wonder now why the handbook mentions it that way. Why does it say that you can select other profiles this early on without providing the links to the sources you need to look at to be successful?
I don't know, because like when you think about it, like the Arch wiki would probably give you a link to something,
and the Gentoo handbook is.
Yeah, and it does in some places. You're right.
Yeah.
And so why, like you'd think, like it would give you a link to go, on a side quest, right?
if you're going to choose any of the, bigger profiles or whatever, maybe bring in the kernel sources first. And, I didn't know this at the time. So I'm poking around trying to figure it out. And I see there's no kernel sources. I'm like, well, how do you get kernel sources? So I thought I had missed a step. I have not missed a step. That was the next page. But it's a head scratcher. And I think, adding a couple links would kind of alleviate that issue, right?
It might.
These bigger things that you need to compile that you require kernel sources for, maybe you need to go get the kernel sources first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a wiki. We could go edit it, probably.
Right. So, but I mean, after an hour, I gave up. I was like, well, I don't know how to get kernel sources. Nothing has shown me how to do that up to this point, and I'm pretty sure. And so I was like, all right, fine. I'm just going to do everything exactly the way that it says and never deviate at all. So instead of using systemd, I use OpenRC. And instead of changing the profile, I'm just going to use whatever's default. And I mean, that was not my intention. I didn't want to do that. I kind of felt like I lost the game by having to go with some default.
You can switch it later, though. So that's
I know.
You can win it back.
And I'm going to start over and I'm going to do it right. And I'm going to, but I had to fail to know what I know now, and I think I feel like there are some edits to the handbook that could be made that wouldn't require having to go through all of that pain. So anyway, so I didn't want to rock the boat. Started all the way over, did all those steps all over again on a new VM, but using the OpenRC, and the profile that was selected was the base profile. Didn't have a GUI, didn't have any of that stuff. It was just the default Linux AMD 64 17.1 profile. That was it. And so I'm not going to have a GUI at the end of my journey, which is okay, but I'll have to build it later. All right. So the very first profile, that's what I went with. I updated at world. It took about 10 minutes, but no errors. So cool.
That's good.
And then I configured licenses. Now this part of the handbook is hieroglyphics to me. I know what kind of licenses I wanted to accept, which is all of them, but there wasn't an all of them option.
There actually is.
Okay, so the way that it explained it made me kind of think that if I chose the crappiest one, that it would also accept all the previous ones. But only 2 of the options actually made that sound that way. And then in the example, there was an accept license equals ***,
which is the opposite, I think, of what you were intending for.
The handbook is not clear.
It is not. So I'm just going to say, like, the dash is a negate, right?
It means not.
Not everything. And then what you have written here tells me that you've added free and binary redistributable back in. So those are the allowed.
Okay, so do I have to go in and add every license? Is that the play?
No, well, the idea is you can add the licenses that you want to add.
Right? Oh, I want all of them.
What you want all of them, so that would be just asterisks. And it tells you not to do that for somewhere
for freedom reasons.
Yes, for freedom reasons. Like if you click on the link, there is a link that discusses some of this stuff a little further, and I did read into it because you're right. It is not intuitive and it isn't very straightforward.
Yeah, well, something that I didn't mention, adding the non-free firmware breaks if you don't fix this right. Like that, it won't let you do it.
Right. So
yeah, it's like go make sure you accept the correct license and do this again. And I'm like,
when it comes time and on like you're probably okay right on your VM because you're emulating things and it's kind of free, right? So when you go to do this on hardware, it may be a different story. And
once I start dealing with microcode and Intel and all this other stuff, because it's going to be on this machine back here,
right?
That's okay. So if I just put quote asterisk quote, that's all the licenses.
That's everything. Yes.
Okay.
And so, but do read the link. One of the things like you point out, it's a little confusing. There is a list of all of the licenses, but it isn't.
I saw that.
It isn't as concise as I'd like to see it, right? It isn't. I don't know. It just isn't as good. It isn't laid out real great. It's all there. All the information is there. I don't want to take away from that. It is all there.
except how to accept them all in one go. That is not there in the handbook.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe I missed it, but I'm pretty sure I didn't because I stared at it.
I only know because I did that. I did what you're not supposed to do, and I added the asterisks and just said,
"Yeah,
give me all the licenses. I don't care."
Yeah.
I'm pragmatic.
Right, so after that, after setting that, set my time zone. You have to set your like character sets, like so ISO and UTF and all that. You have to set your locale, which is cool because then it fixes your clock and stuff. And then you have to like reset your profile again. So after all of this is done, then you have to kind of like bring in all of that character set stuff and then kind of reset your profile to acknowledge that. Installed firmware, this is where you would have messed up if you didn't select the proper licensing, because otherwise bad things happen. It's like, no, your license doesn't approve that.
Yeah, and if you've got Wi-Fi, then, well, guess what? None for you.
Yep. Then the install kernel package, which I'm not 100% sure what it does. I suppose it's like information about the kernels or something, because the next step was to install the binary kernel, which, I mean, I had already been beaten down a little bit, so I'm just like, I'm not going to compile it. I'm just going to put the binary kernel. I'll do that later. And that only took about 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, that shouldn't be too bad.
The issue that I had with updating at world would have been solved with this step, which is emerge syskernel Gentoo sources. That will pull in the kernel sources. But apparently, I found out that when I did eSelect kernel list, it lists all of the kernels that you have. That not only did I have the Gentoo kernel, I had the Gentoo bin kernel. So just installing a kernel would have done it, and then it would have linked it and everything else to allow me to do the GNOME thing. So the GNOME thing where it said didn't have kernel sources, couldn't user source Linux, whatever it was. I probably would have been able to do it at that point. So I checked on the link, and it turns out that it was linked. The binary kernel was linked already. I didn't change it. I didn't dare change it. And then at this point, you're set to check out your UUIDs and write your fstab files, set a host name, install DHCP CD, which is what I did, and that was pretty much where I left off. I had enabled DHCP CD to start after this next reboot, but up until this point, like from this very first step, starting from the beginning, I hadn't rebooted, except to start over. But once I started over, I hadn't rebooted. But I did take a quick break to install NeoFetch, so that I could have that in the show all day.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, wherever it is, I can't tell where that camera.
Yeah, you're pointing at
it.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I left off, man. But that's a lot.
It is a lot.
So again, to recap, that is not easy. If you are blindly following the handbook, you can probably do it. But man, there's going to be a good couple of times where the handbook is not exactly clear in which choice you should make or what you should do.
It's just to point you in a direction.
Yeah.
And you have to make some choices. Sometimes they're hard choices because they could be things that you don't know necessarily. You just don't think about how your system is unique. Because they all are unique, and the processor and all of the components that make it up, especially when you're doing a laptop. If you built your desktop, you probably
it'd be easier to figure it out.
You got a really good idea of what went into that laptop. You have no idea the components necessarily, how they shipped off the factory line. Only the engineers do. So
yeah, exactly.
I mean, it can make it a little tricky. If you've been through some other Linux things, you may know more information about your machine.
I feel like that's only if you had like that wonky Wi-Fi card where you had to like bring in a kernel module yourself.
Right.
You might know the name of the kernel module so that when you're running Gentoo, you'd be like, oh yeah, I do need a kernel module for this.
Right. Or my touchpad is something weird and it's a Synaptic special thing or something, right? You probably would have encountered that elsewhere.
Yep. Don't forget to recompile your kernel after that one. Yeah. It is a whole lot more involved than Arch
Yeah.
And it's definitely more involved than any other distribution I've ever run. I mean, Slackware I feel like has a learning curve, but it ain't like this. And Arch as well. If you're going through not the Arch installer, you're doing it by hand. There's a learning curve there too, but still, it's not like this. So
yeah, and we've talked about this.
Yeah, Void too. Yeah.
Void and Alpine and
yeah, I failed on live stream with Alpine, but you know, yeah, I was still able to get back up on that horse and get Alpine going within an hour. So, but Gentoo is taking multiple sessions of very thoughtful consideration of every single step, just simply because I had already blown it up once. I'm trying not to do that again, and I'm learning. Right, like there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to understand, and I'm picking a lot of that up. But yeah, no one can say this is easy.
It is not easy, but you are just about over a hump where things just start to kind of, get into a maintenance mode, if you will.
Cool.
And it's a little more like you're just doing maintenance to your system, not trying to build it up. And so you've got it built up, and it just keeps itself going a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like now that I have kernel sources, I could switch profiles using the eSelect thing, and then just do the update at world thing.
Yep.
And it should just do it. Because I have.
You might need to add some. So you might need to add some meta packages or whatever, like based on things that you might want. So like one of the things I bumped into.
But I would get a base GNOME system, right?
Yeah, probably. Like, so one of the things I bumped into with the Plasma install, right, is it installs Plasma just fine. But you didn't get any of the KDE apps unless you told it to.
Okay, yeah, and that's something I can, yeah.
You're right. You get booted into it, but you don't have console.
And that's cool because
but you figure it out, right? I mean, it's it's a KDE app. Oh, it didn't install any of the KDE apps. I didn't tell it to do that meta package. In my mind, I was thinking, well, I don't need all of the KDE apps to get going. Not thinking that
console would have been one of them.
Would have been one of them. I would have thought that would have went with the base system, but it doesn't. It just isn't. Yeah. So I mean, it is what it is.
And that's cool. Those are situations that I can figure out. Yeah, it's when the information is missing that it kind of it's harder to sidestep. Turns out you got to go further in the handbook to figure out that you need to go back in the handbook to figure out what the situation actually was. But I got it now. I think I can. I think we're as you mentioned. It looked like I was on the home stretch, so I think we're going to be okay. Probably by the next one of these, I'll have a whole lot less to say and a whole lot more to report. I don't know. It's probably going to change my opinion about Gentoo by the end of all of this, but I don't know what into. It's going to change it, but I don't know to what.
I'm not going to tell you where mine's going.
Okay.
But I will say, so one of the other things is early on, I think we were just barely starting Gentoo here. Joshua Lee, who is one of our followers, but also you'll find him over on
doing
the
Gentoo
Linux
things.
Well, he does Gentoo things, but he's also on the Linux cast. You can watch him over there. He gave us some tips, and I've intentionally sandbagged some of those. I'll save them for later.
Cool.
So we're maybe halfway down his list. I'm not sure. I haven't really been keeping tabs, but I'll look them all over. And certainly if there's any other ones that I don't bump into myself, I will mention his info.